So good morning. We're trying an experiment. It's an interesting experiment. 9:45 means 9:45. That's what we're going to try. Because I have been asked, because I do tend to run a little bit long with the yap, and run a little bit later than technically I should. So I am going to really try to end right about that 10:30, 10:35 at the latest, unless I've got a stop point I really, really, really have to hit, which most of the time I don't. But then on the other end, we're really going to try to start right away at 9:45. So we're going to give it a shot. I was asked, somebody asked me how the interview for the new position went. First interview went well, but funny story. This past Tuesday, I had my follow-up, my feedback conversation with my manager that we always do. If you have an interview, you have a feedback conversation for you're going forward and this is what you did well or didn't do well in your interview, or we're not going forward and this is what you did well and didn't do well. So I had my feedback conversation, and he said right off the bat, he said, I like to lead off right away instead of letting it hanging out there. There were 3 people that interviewed for the position. We're not going forward with any of the 3 individuals. All 3 hit one of the 3 questions really well. Interestingly, it was 3 different questions, but maybe missed little pieces of the other ones. So we went through, we had our feedback conversation. He said I really did well on the first question, which was sort of the really big one, the performance question. He said, you gave one of the best answers I've ever gotten for that one. Here's the things you missed on the other 2 questions. Great, gave me really good, actionable feedback. He said, now we're going to reevaluate the position. We may repost it. We may convert it to another role, from a genius position to a technical expert, something like that. We may just hold it. The problem with just sitting there and holding it is finance might say, well, you guys are functioning fine without it, and you lose it, so we don't want to do that. He said, as soon as something changes, I'll let you know. Cool. So this is 1 o'clock. So I go out to the floor, and I'm working with a customer. It's about 1:15, and Mickey comes out and says, you got a minute? I said, yeah. We went over in the corner. He said, remember I said I would let you know if something changed? I said, yeah. He said, something changed. We are going forward with 2 individuals. You are one of the 2. And I'm like, huh? It was a little bit of miscommunication and timing. They had made the decision over the weekend. He was off on Monday. Tuesday, when he came in to give me the conversation, that was the very first thing he did. So as far as he knew, this is what we were doing. And then he went back to the office and found out, oh, by the way, that changed. Oh, great. Now I got to go tell Jim it changed. So I have my follow-up, my second interview on Wednesday at 2:30. So we'll see how that goes. There are 2 of us going for that one position. The nice thing is I did have in the week in between our market leader, who's the guy I will go for my 3rd round interview, if Lord willing I get there. He was in the store, and I was chatting with him. And I said, oh, I'm going for this part-time position. He said, oh, that's great. That would be really great for you. So the guy that I'm going to be theoretically interviewing with for the 3rd round interview is giving me really good vibes, as well as the senior manager that I will be having my 2nd round interview with. I said, yeah, I hear I'm going to be having a conversation with you relatively soon. He says, yeah, go for it. There's phase 2. Yeah, go phase 2. So I'm like, this is good. I just have to perform now. And I got some good feedback in terms of my first round. So keep it in prayer for Wednesday. I know the Lord's in control for it. If I get it, great. If I don't, that's okay too. So with that, let's go back to our talk about the flood. We have some people that weren't here last week. So what I want to do is just real quick recap of where we were, and that was talking about this theory of plate tectonics. Um, and it was interesting as I was looking over some of my stuff last night. Alfred Wegener, the geologist that first proposed this idea of plate tectonics back in like 1912, when he first proposed it, very, very similar to the guy that first proposed the Big Bang Theory. Interestingly, right around that same time frame, the general reaction to it was that he was a raving lunatic, that this was an idiot idea, and that what did he had like broken crust delusions or something like that. They thought this idea was idiotic, of the Earth being broken up into plates that are moving, that these things are sliding around the surface of the Earth. I mean, you're looking at going all the way across North America is the better part of 3,000 miles, plus half the Atlantic Ocean. You're looking at a plate here that's 5,000 miles across. The Eurasian plate is bigger. The Pacific plate is even bigger. We get this weird view of what the Earth looks like, because most of the time when you look at any map of the Earth, it's from that viewpoint. It's sort of from a viewpoint right on the equator, pretty, maybe a little bit east of zero longitude, because pretty well everything is centralized on either side. If you were to flip it around and center your view on the Pacific Ocean, you see nothing except ocean. The Pacific plate is huge. It's 9,000 miles across from the Philippines all the way over to California or down into the southern Pacific. So the mindset that these things are moving was really ridiculed as a concept. And then again, this was our map of our earthquakes and that kind of stuff. And if I put the two of them up again, they do match up. And as we said last week, the very enticing thing about plate tectonics is that it is, as a scientific theory, it's pretty darn good. It does explain a huge, huge, huge number of things that we do observe about how the Earth works. It does have some problems, and we'll get to that at the end. And then as we go into next week, we're going to start into the hydroplate theory, and sort of in a similar sequence to what I did here. What we looked at was, what's the atmosphere look like today? How does the atmosphere function, sort of big picture today? How does the Earth function today in terms of structure and plate tectonics? Okay, so now what's the hydroplate theory say? Hydroplate theory looks at, this is what the Earth looked like pre-flood. All right, this is the Earth structure, this is the geology of the Earth pre-flood, and then what happened at the flood to produce what we see today, and to see how the hydroplate theory not just deals with the things that we're going to be looking at here, and it does very nicely explain the same things that we're looking at today, but it also deals with the holes. And that's where the real big, from a scientific basis, purely from a scientific basis, that's where hydroplate theory has the advantage over plate tectonics. When you've got a theory that better explains the things that you're actually seeing, there's a much better chance that that one's right. So again, plate tectonics, the basic structures that we see in plate tectonics, the mid-ocean ridges, the mountain range, if I go back here, this huge mountain range that goes down through the center of the Atlantic Ocean and then splits, and part of it goes up into the Indian Ocean, part of it goes up into the Pacific. This huge mountain range that goes all the way around the Earth like the seam on a baseball, that's the spreading zones. That's where the plates are moving apart. hot material is rising in the mantle, and as it rises and hits the top of the plates, the cool plates, it spreads out. Very similar to how in the atmosphere, hot air rises, and when it hits the cold layer at the top of the troposphere, the bottom part of the atmosphere, it starts to spread out. That's what happens with thunderstorms. Cumulonimbus clouds, thunderheads, the air rises, hits a layer where it can't rise anymore, and it spreads out. Well, same deal with the mid-ocean ridges. Those are the spreading zones. The trenches and mountains form where plates run into each other. All right? The plates run into each other, and one plate gets pushed. I'm going to put this down for a second. One plate gets pushed down underneath another one. And in the process, it forms these trenches, these really deep areas, again, not in the middle of the oceans, but typically near the edges. It turns out that there's two kinds of plates. There's oceanic plates, the plates that are under the oceans, and then continental plates. Continental plates are made of a lighter, less dense material, so they tend to float higher on the mantle, whereas the oceanic plates are a denser material, a heavier material. There's one of our holes. Why is there two different kinds of material? Why would there be two different types of materials that make up the ocean plates and the continental plates? Why is there a difference? No really good explanation for that piece. So when an oceanic plate collides, when they run into each other, mountains also form. Typically, trenches form when an oceanic plate runs into another oceanic plate or a continental plate. We'll see this in just a second. Mountains form where two continental plates run into each other. And they run into each other, and instead of getting this kind of process, you get this. And that's where you get your mountains. Two continental plates colliding with each other, and it pushes upward instead of pushing downwards. So, this is what we're going to spend most of today taking a look at, because this is the piece that hydroplate theory has a totally different mindset on, a totally different view on, and there's a lot of really big holes in this particular model. So I'm going to slide over to this side so I can point at it a little bit better. All right, so here's our plate. Now, this particular plate would be sort of like the North Atlantic plate in a lot of ways. You've got oceanic plate on one side, you've got oceanic plate on the other side, and then continental material in the middle. Again, why are some plates, like the North American plate, has partially oceanic, partially continental? Why is the North Pacific plate literally all oceanic? No good explanation. But here's our mid-ocean ridge. Hot material rises up from the mantle, convection. All right, hot material rises, cold material sinks. It rises up, and when it hits the top of the crust, it pushes sideways. All right? And when it pushes sideways, it stretches the plates, they crack. Now material comes up from the middle there, almost like volcanoes. The mid-ocean ridges, not only are they mountain ranges, but essentially they're volcanically produced mountain ranges. This is that material coming up from the mantle at the mid-ocean ridge, like in the middle of the Atlantic, shoving the plates sideways. All right, so the plates go sideways. Here is where the process is called subduction, where one plate gets shoved underneath another one. We'll come back to the holes in this in a few minutes. And you see how when it does, this plate gets shoved down underneath, and in the process, it drags this edge with it as well. And there's, see where it's real deep right there? There's your trench. That's like the Japan trench, like the Philippine trench, like the Puerto Rico trench, like the Chile trench, where two oceanic plates collide and slide underneath each other. Now, what this picture doesn't show, as these things are sliding past each other, as plates slide past each other, they stick. The plates are sliding past each other, they stick, and all of a sudden they break loose. And that produces a earthquake. Yeah. That's our earthquake. So again, plate tectonics explains a lot of things. Three different kind of faults, all right? There's what they call a transverse fault, where plates slide past each other like this. There's like the San Andreas fault is that kind of fault. The plates are sliding sideways. There's a fault where they collide this way, and then there's a kind of a fault where they literally, they slide up and down past each other as well. All relatively well explained by plate tectonics. Now, the one thing this doesn't show, this diagram doesn't show, is that as this part gets shoved down underneath, it gets shoved down into the mantle, which is hot, and that hot material starts to melt this plate. So as this plate melts, this material starts to melt, it rises up toward the surface and produces volcanoes just to the inside of where there's a trench. So let's go backwards. Let's go back to my big picture of the Earth here. All right. So here is where the Pacific plate is colliding with the Eurasian plate. So we have a subduction zone right here where plates are getting shoved underneath each other. And then that material, as it's going down, it melts and it rises and forms volcanoes. And we get what they call island arc volcanoes. The Aleutian Islands along here from Alaska, all the way across to Kamchatka in Russia, the entire going down along Japan. The Japanese islands are all volcanoes. They're all volcanic islands. And then it splits and it goes out with our islands going out to like Guam and that way, and then going down toward the Philippines. All of these islands down here, the Philippines and Sumatra and Java and all this stuff all around in here, those are all volcanoes. And by plate tectonics, those are being formed as that material melts and comes up to the surface. Great, explains it really well. It does a really good job of it. Same thing here, even the islands of the Caribbean, those are all volcanoes, okay? Trinidad and Tobago and St. Martin and all those islands in that arc, those are all volcanic islands. All those things, okay? We get volcanoes that occur in Mexico, caused by this subduction process where it's getting shoved underneath. Volcanoes along the Andes Mountains here. There's volcanoes here as well, all right? Even same thing up here. Now here's where one of the little holes is. There's, if I go back one, if we go back to our plates here, there's a plate boundary that sort of goes through the middle of the Mediterranean, divides the African plate from the Eurasian plate. And yet you're not really getting island arc volcanoes there. You're getting volcanoes. There's volcanoes all the way up in through Italy here. And you've got these big mountain ranges here in the middle of Europe, right? The Alps, but they're not near a border. That's a little odd. We've got some questions about that. Let's go back to our cool diagram here. Hey, there we go. So we get our volcanoes like right around in here, okay? The other thing this doesn't show is continental plates running into each other. when continental plates run into each other, you don't get this. You don't get subduction. You get this collision kind of process. And there, and again, going backwards, now you have the Indian plate moving northward, colliding with the Eurasian plate, and India is basically getting sort of shoved underneath and shoving up into the Himalayan mountains. Okay? And yet you've got other mountain ranges, and this is where we start getting into some of our problems, that aren't at plate boundaries, that they just don't make sense. The other thing that plate tectonics then goes back to is what they call the theory of Pangaea, all right, or Pangaea, however you want to, I guess the correct Greek pronunciation would be Pangaea. Pangaea, literally from the Latin, is one earth. Pan, one or continuous, and Gaia is the Greek word for earth, all right, one earth. What it really is talking about is the idea of a supercontinent, that at one time all of our continents were put together, and that these tectonic processes, these moving plates, split the continents apart. And it explains that jigsaw puzzle fit of our mid-ocean ridges and the continents, particularly North America, South America, with Africa. Doesn't really help with some other places. So here's Pangaea. All right. India was once stuck here onto the side of Africa. A little guy hiding in there, that's Madagascar, was once attached to the side of Africa. Antarctica sort of tucked up there. South America tucked in there sort of under the armpit of Africa, right in there. And North America tucks in, and Eurasia and Australia was sort of tucked in there. All that good stuff. And yeah, we can make it fit. I can make any jigsaw puzzle fit into a spot. I can just shove it in there. It's going to fit. And that's part of the problem, is that we can make our jigsaw puzzle sort of kind of work, but like what you don't necessarily really notice on that diagram, I don't know if this one shows it a little bit better. Here we got Antarctica, Africa, cool. South America tucking underneath there, North America, great, good, Eurasia, all that stuff. Australia, It's interesting how they made Australia fit in there, because what they did with Australia is they took Australia and went like this with it. They didn't just slide it over. This works great. I mean, North America, South America, tucking into Africa, and by where it works great, I don't remember if that slide, no, that slide doesn't, unfortunately that one doesn't show it. On our plate here, trying to find images online that show everything I want to show the way I want to show it. The motions, how the plates are moving. African plate is moving this way. South American plate is moving this way. North American plate is moving this way. Eurasian plate is moving this way. Easy. They're all moving away from the North Atlantic Ridge. Great, cool, that works. Indian plate is moving northwards. So it's tucking underneath the Eurasian plate and forming the Himalayas. Great, that works wonderful. Problem is this guy, the Australian plate. The Australian plate's moving sort of that direction-ish, all right? How do you then take Australia and basically, you have to take Australia to make the Pangaea model fit. You have to take Australia and not just shove it back over here, but you have to shove it back over here and spin it 90 degrees. you're making this part of Australia tuck into Africa. All right. You're making India not just to again sort of running the film backwards. If you run the film backwards, North America, South America, Eurasia, Africa come together again by the theory along the North Atlantic Ridge. That one works out really great. The ones that don't work out all that well are things like India, because you have to make India make a turn to make India tuck in properly. You have to make Australia make a turn to make it tuck in properly. Antarctica, same thing. You have to sort of rotate Antarctica to make it go in there properly. And if the plate is, again, our red lines here are a mid-ocean ridge going all the way up here. If that's where it's expanding away from, if it's expanding here and it's expanding here, how is it moving? It doesn't work. It doesn't always work out in terms of the directions. So if we now go back to our Pangea images here. Again, you can force a jigsaw puzzle to fit together. The picture's not always going to work. And it just, pretty picture, nice thought, great idea. But there's some really, really big holes in the plate tectonic theory. And I just want to take a couple minutes and just sort of touch on a few of them, sort of file them away and keep them in mind, because a lot of them get addressed by hydroplate theory. They don't get addressed by plate tectonics. And like I said, the nice thing, if you want to say nice thing, about plate tectonic theory is that it's better as a theory than Big Bang is. Big Bang theory has a lot more holes in it than the plate tectonics theory does. So let's go back to our map of the world, because that's our best way to really look at where our problems are. All right, so problem number one is this theory works really great. Again, we have to sort of go back to their mindset that the Earth is about 5 billion years old. This works really good to explain those underground processes, the convective plumes in the mantle and all that good stuff. That all works really great if we start this process 3 billion years ago. Cool, great. What was the Earth doing for the first 2 billion years it was around? And how did this process get started? There's your issue. What's setting up these plumes of hot material rising in the mantle? Why are they doing that? What's interesting is, and again, it's the reason why I brought the atmosphere up. When we look at the structure of the atmosphere, remember, it's the same kind of process, this rising hot material and sinking cold material. In the atmosphere's case, it's air, it's the atmosphere. There's a driving force. What's the driving force that makes, on the Earth, that makes hot air rise and cold air sink? Where's the hot air rising? At the equator. Why is the air hot at the equator? Because it's hot at the equator, right? We're getting the most direct sunlight at the equator, so the equator is hotter. The air sinks at the poles. Why does it sink at the poles? Because it's cold at the poles. There is a basic fundamental physics process that makes this thing start. The atmosphere is hot at the equator, it's cold at the poles, and it sets up this circulation pattern. Great, wonderful, fantastic. Where is the process what's the thing that gets this process set up? The rising material at the mid-ocean ridges and the cooling, sinking material at the trenches, at the subduction zones. They've got no clue. There's no good explanation for what gets this process started. And when you look at it, you can't just, it's one of the neat things about science is that all the scientific disciplines fit together, all right? Meteorology, and it's one of the things I always used to tell my students, is that physics is the absolute fundamental science. That's not because I'm a physics teacher, because of reality, all right? Physics is the absolute fundamental science. Physics is the study of the laws that make the universe work. Meteorology works because of the laws of physics. Geology works because of the laws of physics. So you can't just say, oh, cool, we've got this geological theory of plate tectonics, that we've got rising material at the plate boundaries. What's making these plates? Why do we have these plates? What's going on here? Oh, because it's the Earth's cooling off. And as the Earth's cooling off, it's shrinking. And that makes the plates crack. Okay, cool, I'll take that one. But it still doesn't explain why there's hot plumes of material rising at the ridges. What's driving that? We have a physics explanation for the hot material rising at the equator and sinking at the poles in the atmosphere. We have an explanation for that with physics. We don't for plate tectonics. There's no start point. There's no driving point. What's making this start? Ooh, God started it. There's an explanation. It's the wrong one, but they don't have an explanation for it. They don't have a what's the switch that turns this thing on? The subduction process, the process where the oceanic plate gets shoved underneath another one, okay? At the continental boundaries, like here where India and Eurasia come together, the Himalayan mountains, does that sort of make sense? You got India running into Asia, bang, and what do? They crunch up this way and it forms the Himalayan mountains. That makes sense. Cool, great. Because you've got two kinds of plates that are the same. All right, it's a continental plate of India. You got a continental plate of Eurasia, and they're colliding with each other, and it builds up the mountains. Great, fantastic. What about the subduction zones? Oceanic plate hits an oceanic plate. Why did they not do the same thing? Why does one get shoved underneath the other one? In other words, what's the starting process? What's the starting process for this? Why does one get shoved underneath the other one? Why don't they just lump upward just like continental plates do? No good explanation for that. We have no explanation for that start process. And that's one of the biggest issues with plate tectonics is it does a really good job of explaining what we see now, but you've got to go back and get to a start point and say what kicked this off? What made this process start happening in the first place? We're not looking at a process that has been going on forever. Again, if we go back to our map of the world here, some other little minor issues. Where do mountains form? Where plates collide with each other. So mountains and trenches form at plate boundaries. Does our model work? Andes Mountains. Nazca Plate colliding with South America Plate. Check. Rocky Mountains. Pacific Plate colliding with North American Plate. Check. island arc volcanoes, and then some of the volcanic or the mountainous structures here in China. Pacific plate colliding with Eurasian plate. Check. Himalayan mountains. India colliding with Eurasia. Check. Go west in Pennsylvania. Or go north up into New York. Or go west to Route 81 and run Route 81 from Maryland down through Virginia and down into Tennessee. What do you got? The Appalachian Mountains. Where'd they come from? They're in the middle of a plate. North American plate is here. This is the North American plate. Rocky Mountains on the boundary, cool. Oh, here's their explanation. I love this one. Remember we talked about Pangaea? It's not the only one. These things have been moving around and banging into each other for all this time. So we've had other things in the past. And notice the big difference between the Appalachians and the Rockies, or the Appalachians and the Alps, or the Appalachians and the Andes. They look different, very different. All right? The Andes Mountains, the Alps, the Rockies are, according to geologists, young mountains. What do they look like? Really big and spiky. They're taller. They're very spiky, for lack of a better term. All right? What are the Appalachians more like? Much more rounded, much more rolling because of erosion. They've been around longer. They must be older. So they've been eroded. So that's why they're flatter. So they must have been from other collisions at other times of other plates running into each other. And this is just like the leftover remnants of a different plate boundary that was happening at some other time back in ancient history. The thing with this whole theory, and it makes it very, very convenient to be able to try to eliminate that issue, is that the subduction zones, the place where the plates get shoved down underneath, are the Earth's recycling system. Eventually, the entire, remember, new plate being produced here in the Pacific, shoving its way across, and eventually getting shoved down into the mantle like a giant conveyor belt. It comes up at the mid-ocean ridge near South America, goes all the way across the Pacific Ocean, and then gets shoved back down into the mantle to be melted and recycled. So there's other continents and other mountains and other structures that used to be on the Earth that have gotten shoved down underneath into these trenches and down into the mantle and melted and recycled, and we have no idea what they look like. There's just some things that are left over, like the Appalachian Mountains. All right. We already talked a little bit about the Alps. The Alps are a little bit too far away from a plate boundary to get the kind of mountains you have for the Alps. The Alps in Europe are very similar to the Rockies, very similar to the Himalayas, but they're too far from a plate boundary. What's going on there? What's happening there? Again, what's starting this breakup process? They sort of rewind this back to our Pangea picture, and the problem is when they do that, okay, great, let's get rid of this mid-ocean ridge by shoving everything back together again, and yet they keep the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a plate boundary. All right, it's going through the Mediterranean, down through the Red Sea, out through the strait here, Bab el-Mandeb, into the Gulf of Oman, and then it reconnects here and goes around. So this is a place where it's splitting, and that is also going down here into Africa. By their thought, the same process that split Madagascar away from Africa is also eventually going to split what they call the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, this area here. This is a fault line here, what they call a rift valley. This is a spot where on a continent, this is happening. And this guy is eventually going to split away the same way that Madagascar did. Oh, see, look at that. You know what that is? That's 1030. But they don't have a good explanation for why. Why has this been so crazy active, but now this one is like just starting up? How come? The other one, and again, their explanation is good until you start really asking the deep questions. There's not just the rising material at the mid-ocean ridges. There's also rising material at places that they call hotspots. And the one that they always use as the example of a hotspot, of a mid-plate hotspot, is Hawaii. It's a plume of hot material coming up from the mantle, causing the volcanoes that are the Hawaiian Islands. And if you look at the Hawaiian Islands, the big island of Hawaii, where the current active volcanoes are, is the first one. That's the one that's sitting on top of the hot spot. But because the Pacific plate is moving that way, the hot spot's standing still, but the plate's moving, so it keeps popping up new islands. But those islands gradually erode and get pushed down into the ocean, and the entire Hawaiian island chain strings up this direction, and the islands get smaller as you go that way. All right? The big island of Hawaii is where the active volcanoes are, but Honolulu, the capital of Hawaii, is on Oahu, the next island over. And there's a big volcano there, Diamond Head, that giant eroded volcano that overlooks the harbor at Pearl Harbor and Honolulu and that whole area. But that one's extinct now because the material coming up, the hot material coming up, it's slid off. Okay, cool, great, that's wonderful. Why is there a hot spot there? Why there? What's driving that hot spot? Why has that hot spot been there for so long? Because what they say is, literally this entire chain of underwater mountains that goes all the way across here and then turns, ooh, the plate turned. See it? The plate turned. This bunch turns. This plate turned, but you don't see that kind of stuff here. I don't see that there either. The plate turned. How'd the plate turn? And why is that hot spot there? Why is there a hot spot there? Why is there not a mid-ocean ridge? What's the difference in the process? What's the difference in what's going on? Mid-ocean ridge compared to hot spot. And then look at all the rest of them down here. These are all hot spots. Not ridges, hot spots. Individual little hot spots popping up that are forming all these underwater mountains called seamounts all over this part of the Pacific Ocean. Why is this part of the Pacific Ocean look so different from this part? And it's the same way in the Atlantic, down here, in this part of the Atlantic Ocean, sort of the same way. Why is that so wildly different than the ridge area and the stuff going on over here? This is the one that gets me. I'm going to bounce out of the slide, go into my edit mode so I can zoom in. What the heck is this? This dead straight line that goes from the Bay of Bengal down into, what is that thing? There's a trench there, but it's not a plate boundary. And it looks weird when you look at the map of the Earth. You see the underwater mountains and the ridge lines and the trenches and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, here's this big sword. They got no clue. They have no idea. Let me go over here. There, you can see a little bit better. All right, here's Hawaii, and then the chain goes over this way. Oh, but wait a minute, there's that little one that hooks up that way too. And there's another little one that hooks up that way too. No good explanation. The last one, and it's sort of associated with our Appalachians. If the Appalachian Mountains are an old plate boundary, all right, an old collision plate boundary, why do you have earthquakes in the middle of plates? And I mentioned this last week. The most intense earthquake that ever struck in North America. Not Alaska, not California. The New Madrid earthquake on the New Madrid Fault. Right there. St. Louis. Why? Why is there a fault in the middle of the plate? And that's not the only one. It's the one that's just like we use Hawaii as the hotspot example to help support plate tectonics. We use the New Madrid one as, where'd that come from? It's still there. The New Madrid Fault is still there. It's still live. It's still active. Why are there hot springs in Arkansas? It's associated with the same thing. What's that? Is that a hot spot like Hawaii? But if it is, why aren't there volcanoes in Arkansas and Missouri and near the New Madrid Fault? A lot of issues that they have. There's some big problems with it. So what we're going to go into next week, what we're going to start next week, is we're going to introduce the new idea called the hydroplate theory. It is very new, like maybe the last 10 or 15 years. And it is wrapped around trying to take our geological evidence of what the earth looks like, but connect that together with what we know about the Bible, the fountains of the deep, and the descriptions, specifically the descriptions of the flood. All right? And then ultimately, where we're going to, my big deal here with this ultimately is that ultimately, why are we spending all this time looking at this scientific aspect of the flood and the scientific aspect of geology and all that kind of stuff? This isn't earth science. This isn't a science class. Why are we doing this? God destroyed the world in the flood for a reason. And he promised he would never destroy the earth again by a flood. But what do we know about Revelation? What's going to happen in Revelation? He's going to destroy the earth again in a different way. And we want to look at that. There's parallels. We want to look into the deep part of that. The flood it's one of the most underrated stories in the Bible in terms of its true importance. The flood ranks up there in importance with the birth, death, and resurrection of Christ. In terms of, me personally, if I was going to rank like big picture stories in the Bible as most important, resurrection story number one. Revelation, me personally, I would argue number two. And then it's a really tight one between flood and creation. And they're sort of connected. They're really close together in time. In terms of the importance and how that is dealing with the big picture of everything throughout the Bible. And there's so much in it, the very subtle pieces. And that's that fourth piece that we're eventually going to get back to. Ultimately, we're going to roll all the way back to Genesis 6, 1 through 4. The sons of God came down to the daughters of men and saw they were fair, that whole thing. That goes all throughout the Bible and is probably, it really ties that together with Revelation, together with a lot of things that are going on today. Teaser, that's where we're going. All right. I still went long. It's what happens. So let's close in prayer and we'll encourage people to come in encourage people to come early. They may be blessed. Lord, we do thank you so much for this day, for all the blessings that you give to us each day. Thank you for this church, for the opportunity to open your word, to bring it forth, to be able to see how these events in the distant past affect us today, that they're so important to us today and to our future, Lord. They help to show us that the Bible is true, that what we see in the Bible is true, not just then, but today. I pray that you'll be with us throughout our service today. Be with Pastor. Hide him behind the cross. Have his message come out strong and clear. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen.